Yes, indeed. Alhamdulillah for this wonderful day. So before we move on to our first speaker this morning, so allow us to remind you of the following. So all participants must put their microphone
Recording
on mute
in progress.
and turn their videos off upon entry. The session will be recorded for documentation purposes. The event is being shown live on Facebook. Please share the link. We'll appreciate that. So for your questions, please enter them on the chat box or the comment section in Facebook. So conflict in Mindanao is one of the world's longest running, with roots tracing back to the colonial era. So to talk more about the Mindanao conflict, so ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our first speaker. So he is a lawyer by profession. He completed his baccalaureate and law degrees from Xavier University. In addition, our speaker obtained his Master of Laws in Comparative Constitutional from Central European University in Hungary on a scholarship grant. He is currently studying for a Doctor of Civil Law degree at the University of Santo Tomas in Manila. He is working with Public Affairs Section of the U.S. Embassy, Philippines. So our treasured attendees, I consider this man a man who can make all things possible. And he is a mentor in so many ways, and I am forever indebted to him. So it's my honor, ladies and gentlemen, our treasured attendees, to give you our first speaker who will talk on dissecting the Mindanao conflict, Attorney Neil Y. Pacamalan of U.S. Embassy, Manila, Philippines. Let's give him our warm applause and our beautiful smile.
Thank you, Ms. Weng. Magandang umaga. Assalamualaikum. Mayong buntag, Mindanao. So I will share screen. I hope everyone is okay amid the pandemic. This is a very disquieting era. And thank you for coming to this virtual forum. I hope you can see my slide, the first. Okay, not okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Yes, it's okay.
So a few words before I begin. So we are all teachers. Myself, in a sense, I'm a teacher. I think this is very important to have an open discussion. I'd like to encourage everyone to journey with me. This is a topic that practically affects everyone because we are teachers in our classrooms. So we are practically in control of what happens inside the classroom. And peace education, especially in Mindanao, is very important. As a teacher, you may say that I can only teach a portion of Mindanao, or you can teach the entire of it. Sometimes we have this personal bias, and we would say, I don't want to share something that is offensive to my culture and to my people. It's entirely up to you. But as a teacher, peace educator, I think it is also wise to present all the stories, narratives, and let the students decide. I think that's our primary role as a teacher, that we don't want to screen and filter information down to the people, but present the entirety of the divergent and the disparate narratives of the Mindanao. Because this is a free country, you are allowed to argue and debate. Violence is not allowed. And that adds into a robust discussion about the topic on Mindanao. I would say that this is a bit complicated. Even if I'm from Mindanao, I was born and raised in Mindanao. I had been into IDP communities I was once an IDP because of the conflict in my area. I was born between Misamis Oriental and Lanao del Norte. I was practically in the boundary. So I could understand the sentiments of people who are still in the IDP camps. I was able also to look at the Mindanao conflict based on my personal experience and based on my present work. I have dealt with a lot of people and across political spectrums, and the younger up to the adult, the seniors. I have written also about Mindanao. So practically, like I may have studied Mindanao, but just like anybody else, the more you understand Mindanao, is the more complicated that you have to look at it from different perspective. It becomes more complicated, more challenging. So it's no guarantee that being a Mindanaoan and having read and having lived here, that you would be able to present the entirety of the picture of Mindanao. I think that's how it is. That's precisely the reason why we have so many people and scholars to look at Mindanao, because Mindanao's situation cannot be reduced into the lens of one person. So other people can contribute. So what I'm doing today is to contribute into the discussion about what is happening in Mindanao and looking at the complex web of challenges in Mindanao and see for yourself. If you think that part of my presentation isn't worth your time, you can disregard it and say, I will not include it in my peace education subject. If you think there's something that you can add more into your own lesson plan or your curriculum in your discussion, it's also good to include it. And part of it would be to share it to the audience, your students, and have a discussion. I think that's the most important and vital component of teaching, that you share and let the people decide. This is similar to the ongoing debate in the US right now about the critical race theory, which says that racism is embedded into the system and it marginalizes Black-colored people. And some states have banned it already in the public school. Others would say we should allow it because all the more that it's in the open, people can contribute into discussion. This is the same thing. I don't think we try to push under information that is offensive to us or to other people, but let it there in the open and let the students decide for themselves what is best for them. So I will continue now with my discussion. I will present to you the structure of my, I will just move it down this one. So I'd like to cover the following areas and look at, instead of directly jumping into the jugular and look at the challenges, I would like to start my conversation with opportunities in the land of promise. Set the conversation. And then I proceed to the challenges. And then I'll try to disentangle the complex web of Mindanao challenges. And from there, I'll go back to the opportunities looking at development assistance, whether we are contributing to the conflict in Mindanao or we are not, or are we aggravating or are we not? So I'll start the first of opportunities. Some of you may have known this one, but I just ran through it for review of some of you. We look at our natural resource. We have the 8 major river basins. We look at how important it is. Water is very vital to plants and animals. Without it, we'll die just like us. Water, we won't survive. So this is very important. This is not to mention the Lake Lanao in Lanao area. 1/3 of our land area is devoted to agriculture. That makes us lucky. And because of that, we are the food basket, the country. We contribute 40% of the country's food requirements. The world's largest exporter of banana after Ecuador. And our largest banana plantations are found in Mindanao, particularly, I think, in Davao and parts of Cotabato area. We are home to the country's mineral wealth, copper, gold, iron. So we have mining companies all over Mindanao. Surigao is the center of the mining industry. We have significant deposits of natural gas and oil in central Mindanao. I think that's precisely the reason why some foreign companies are going into that area, are in the area to discover and tap the natural resource. Other opportunity, we have the human resource. And this is the diversity of our religion and culture. It enriches our understanding of other people through the presence of so many cultures and religions of ours. And I will say this is an opportunity because it is an opportunity to unite us, to improve us, to understand each other. Clan culture per se is not bad. It's actually good. If you look main or partner, it creates a strong social network. That's how we are. And this is not unique in the country of East Asia. If you look at surveys after surveys, there is a consistent rating of people that traditional leaders and local leaders are actually the source of important information. They're the first. So traditional leaders, local leaders, in the latest survey that I got, they are most trusted source of information in Mindanao. In a Muslim community, for us access to other Muslim community in some industry. Now I start to dive into the challenges, and I think we take this one in open mind and maybe make an introspection about why is this happening rather than this is not happening, or maybe yeah, but then open a conversation. You have to remember that the Philippines is located in the typhoon belt, and so Mindanao is not typhoon free. Because of mining industry, which is all over Mindanao, it also contributes to landslides and natural disasters that we create IDP communities, the internally displaced people. Poverty incidence in BARM is the highest in the country as of 2018, 61.8. And more than 50% of the youth belongs to poor families. Unfortunately, most of us in Lanao, poverty incidence is highest. And Lanao del Sur is considered the poorest province in the country. Even before this aggravated, the Marawi Siege aggravates the whole situation. The survey was taken before the Marawi Siege and continues now. In terms of education, madrasas in tatters. If you look at the madrasa program in the country, we have traditional integrated alive takderia. Well, alive is not actually a madrasa school. It's just a component in the public school where Islamic is offered. What's very important in education is that traditional integrated, because there are nearly 2,000 traditional schools, Islamic schools in Mindanao, and many of them are part of the non-accredited DepEd. The integrated are what we call as Islamic schools, traditional schools that are now part of the program of the Department of Education. But if you look at it only less than 10% of the integrated, but the rest of it, traditional, there's so many. The problem is that in the Muslim society, madrasa is a vital component. This is the first step to understanding Islamic education, learning our faith. But the learning of our Islamic values and faith is actually done by traditional madrasas that support only from the financial contribution from community and individuals. There is no government. So what happens is that if there's no support from the government, and you know that how a community contributes, practically there is no solid foundations, the curriculum and the teaching of Islamic education, the traditional madrasa. And you have to remember that the first Islamic education or education system in the country that predates colonization is the madrasa. But now it's neglected. And I can understand, because one of the reasons is that of the legal principle of separation in church and state, that too much entanglement of the state into religion is practically a big no-no in our constitution. But there are some areas that we can leverage and make use to reach out to the madrasa without incurring and infringing into the constitutional ban. So in 2018 survey, almost 2,000 madaris. If you look at, there's so many traditional weekend madaris. So these are mostly do not follow any curriculum from the DepEd or from the secular education. Now, out of school youth and children ages between 15 and 24 and 6 and 14, we look at in BARM, we have the highest compared to the country's makeup. Hello? Okay, I'll continue. So the reasons for this one of OSYs or OSC is that of marriage, early marriage, and problems in the family. And second, insufficient family income. And third, lack of personal interest. This is in the order of the gravity. So why people drop out problems in the family. Clan, while it is an opportunity, is also a challenge because shadow economy, the underground economy. And in 2019, for example, clan feuds, clan fighting rose to nearly 50%. And the largest concentration is in Lanao del Sur and Cotabato. This is after the Marawi shoots. Also alarming is military. The gun culture is, I would say, very challenging. According to the PNP, 99% of guns used in crimes are illegal. 2.1 million are illicit. A fraction belongs to the government, and only 1.7 are legally owned. So what are the sources? Where do we get these guns? One, technical smuggling. These are spare parts coming from other countries, brought into the Philippines, assembled and produce a gun. Domestic production, that's what we have in the Philippines, in Cebu, in Mindanao. Recycling of guns on battlefield, the common news story, where soldiers, extremist groups are left on the ground, guns are abandoned, and they are being taken and sold in the black market. Expired and then renewed firearms. These are firearms issued and then expired and then becomes illicit. But there is also here in the survey that was conducted, there was no mention about gun ownership that has been done for ages, like parts in Mindanao. I think our Imay Left Moral is right in saying that the armed forces of the Philippines is the main source of loose firearms with DND markings, because you remember a news story several months back, and even now, there are firearms that are found in the possession of extremist groups with markings of DND. Violent conflict is a major source. This is an offshoot of our armed forces and armed groups. Government troops encounter the local foreign terrorist groups. As an example of a violent conflict, suicide bombing in Holo in August of 2020, and suicide bombing again January 2020. The Pintakasi in Mamasapan, Pintakasi because it's a free for all. It's actually it's a local language that says free for all. All those armed groups in the area in Mamasapan contributed into the fighting. And according to the reports of the Congress during the investigation, Masapano, there were a number of armed groups in Mamasapano at the time of the incident. The BIFF, MILF, you have other private armed groups and other lawless elements. So it's not just about one group, but so many. We have private armies, and that is common, usually by politicians. We also have private militias. The private militias are organized by the community or private individuals to defend their communities from outside force. A classic example that happened about several months back was the resurgence of private remnant of the Christians, and they were trying to they set up the private militia in Cotabato to defend themselves against the incursion of the BIFF forces. We have also violent conflict as an offshoot of informal shadow economy, like trafficking of drugs, persons, guns, cattle rustling. Rido, you know that. And I can show you later on why it is a polarizing issue among communities. The primary reasons for Rido are politics and land ownership. Lana del Sur has the most number of cases of Rido, but Cotabato has the most number of violent cases. IDPs, this is, I would say, one of the challenges in Mindanao, because this is a product of violent conflict or natural disasters. As of June 30, 2020, we have the following groups of IDPs and the duration of their being displaced. Group A, if it is 30 days, but we have so many thousands. Group B, more than 130 days, but again, thousands of families, individuals, sorry. Group C, again, thousands of families and individuals for more than 180 days. You have to take note of Group C, because Group C is like a cancer in society. It remains there forever, and it continues unresearched as if there's no cure. The sources of Group C are Zamboanga, you remember Zamboanga Sheets in 2013? They are still there. Lana del Sur, because of the Mara Sheets in May 2017, they're there. Northern Mindanao, because of the typhoon. Eastern Mindanao. Central Mindanao, because of the conflict in the provinces. We also have Mindanao, due to natural disaster. This is IDP because of armed conflict and Rido as of June 2020. It's because of the Rido armed conflict. And this one was February to March. This was a clash between, and this is a tragic because the encounter happened between the BIFF, the Bangsamoro Island Freedom Fighters, and the set up by the MILF and the government to monitor peace on the ground. So the JPST went into the area and SPMS box to look at the alleged report of armed groups without seeking from the MILF. When they went there, they had encounter with the BIFF that resulted to the displacement of 60,000 individuals. Now, what makes it really violent is that because of the presence of the non-state armed groups. And it's not just one group, but so many, like Abu Sayyaf, in Basilan, in Sulu, in Sarangani, in Sar al-Kilapa. You have, of course, the Dawla Islamiyah in Mautigu. The leader of Isnilon Haben was killed, slain. He was succeeded by, he was killed, I think he was, but still succeeded by a member of the Mountie, Sakaria Romato, and still here. We also have the BIFF, and the location of BIFF is SPMS box, as I've mentioned. This was founded by Umbracato, former commander of 105th Base Command. You have to remember, the 105th Base Command covers also Mamasapano. And most of those in the MILF camp in that 105th or members of 105th of Umbracato. But upon the death of Umbracato, the BIFF has been fragmented and divided into 3 groups, one led by Imam Minimbang, which currently has been harassing communities through Kagi-Karyalan. And the other one is Ismael Bongos, another faction of BIFF, another faction of BIFF. So BIFF is not just one single body, but a constituent parts that sometimes may clash with some members of the same BIFF community. Of course, the MILF, which is now which established agreement with the national government. MNLF was still there, and the problem with MNLF is that it is not factionalized. It is composed again of several factions. We call the Executive Council, and you know that. We also have the faction of former Congressman Alvarez Isnaji, faction of Habib Mujahab Hashim, and of course the New People's Army. Remember, it used to be that New People's Army is highly concentrated in northern Mindanao, eastern Mindanao, but INPEs now are strategically positioned also in areas where extremist groups are located in central Mindanao, Maguindanao, and even in Lanao del Sur. So the Lanao del Sur, the conflict areas, traditional grounds of conflict areas in Mindanao, like central Mindanao, Lanao, Maguindanao, these are no longer the mainstay of the Islamist groups, but also the New People's Army. So I'll come to the part of complex web Mindanao challenges, and I try to look at the different drivers and indicators that spur violence in Mindanao. In most discussions, I've observed that when you ask people about what's the cause of conflict in Mindanao, you always have these historical injustices. Our forebears had been discriminated against, were denied of this, blah, blah, and all these things. It's very common. So I'll start from there that one of the reasons why we have Mindanao conflicts because it is historical. That's given. And I don't dwell on that because I'd rather dwell on the present and look at how we can contribute to finding a solution. But beyond that, it has metamorphosed into there's shadow economy. These are drugs, firearms trafficking, piracy, all those illicit transactions and activities. But you also have the non-state armed groups that I've discussed before. The problem is that there are so many non-state armed groups here. You're not just dealing about the Abu Sayyaf, but AKP, BIFF, and all its factions. You have Mauti, MNLF, MILF, private armed groups, and so many. And you also have clan, family, social networks that if you review my previous slides, they contribute also to what happens to Mindanao now. And then of course, Rido, and then gun culture. Well, some of you may have wondered why is it there are only 5? Because that's how I see it, based on my understanding, analysis, and my own observation. There could be many. You can have as many labels as you can provide here. It's entirely up to you. But I would rather concentrate on this one because I think these are the major sources and drivers and triggers and cleavages of our conflict in the region. For example, if I may go back to the slides, either 1 or 2, or maybe there are more factors, indicators that can produce conflict in Mindanao. Take a pick here, Rido, here in 1. In other words, because they are adjoined, meaning this affects to others. The Rido here is a product also, an offshoot of the others' circles. So these are fluid, not just confined in one circle, but it overlaps. It encroaches into, it contaminates and penetrates to other areas here in my presentation. For example, Rido is a product of one, clan. That's correct. The economy, yes. Gun culture, yes. And non-state armed groups. You take out the guns here, and you would say, yeah, there may be quarrel, but not maybe violence. Maybe verbal tussle between people if you don't have any guns. You take out non-state armed groups, do you think people would come into the discussion with their arms and kill each other? No. If you take out, for example, shadow informal economy, most of the Rido cases are actually a product also of so many converging factors. Because people are involved into shadow economy, when they come into the Rido, they bring with them their own firearms. You take out also a clan family or a clan or family that is violent, Rido will not take place. Because Rido is cultural, it can be changed. You take, for example, gun culture in the country. Slide here. It is a product of so many things. A gun culture, because you have non-state armed groups. Gun culture, it contributes into why we have so many non-state armed groups. Gun culture happens because it's part of our network of family. Gun culture because it feeds into shadow economy. We take another one, non-state armed groups. Why do we have this group? Remember that most of these members are members of the same family, clans. Take, for example, Abu Sayyaf. How come that, for example, here we have, take, for example, so ASG members, the Ajang, these are sons of the martyred. These are family members, part of a network family that are now engaged into informal shadow economy to gain money. So what I'm saying is that the convergence of all these things, the presence of all these things, the presence of one is not just an isolated. It does not exist in isolation. It exists because it is being fed by others indicators. So that if you take out one here, still the others will exist. If you take all, maybe that's a time that you will say there would be no conflict in Mindanao, but it's impossible. One, it's cultural, it's difficult, and it's a big challenge to change that. Third, it has been part of the tradition of the gun culture. Third, clannish in nature is part again of our tradition. Shadow economy, unlikely because of the conflict in Mindanao, porous border, and insecurity. I think people would continue to steal again. If you have this one, the likely effect would be, if we apply this one to the other challenges I mentioned, say madrasa education. How do these challenges contribute to the madrasa education or impact into the madrasa education? It's very substantial. Why? Because when there is conflict, there's no classroom. There are no children who would study. They would flee and leave the area. So madrasa education is affected, especially traditional madrasa, which are actually located in the communities, in conflict-affected areas, in conflict-affected areas in Mindanao. So when there is a violent incident, children will not go to school. It also contributes to the violent conflicts. You know, I discussed this one already, because you have gun culture, you have shadow economy, you have Rido. This contributes into too many violence. And poverty. I think this, I need not overemphasize this one. The presence of all these conflicts is actually will produce poverty, will drive poverty, will continue to entrench poverty in communities. And of course, One of the reasons why you have so many OSYC is because, again, of the conflict. One of the reasons mentioned in my previous slide where we have so many OSY is that of the family problems. And clan family networks influences that. And of course, IDPs. IDP is not just a problem, it's just an offshoot of natural disaster. It could also be done through the violence in Mindanao. And IDPs happen because, again, of the triggers and the factors, gun culture, clan networks, and the like. So all these things contribute. So if somebody would tell us, how do you solve the problem in Mindanao? Make a scan of all those triggers and all those factors before you will say this and that. So it's a major challenge really for all international organizations and any development assistance programs to look at Mindanao and say this is how we do it, because they have to consider the different factors and indicators. Let's take a look at this one briefly, but maybe this could be a good exercise for discussion. For the last 20 years or so, assistance programs from countries outside of Asia, for example, US, Europe, and the like, have been pouring money into the land of promise. And what happens now? If you look at the survey conducted, we have top 10 foreign donors in the Philippines. In 2011, the highest in Japan, it's actually $2 billion plus, followed by China and World Bank. 2011. But the United States, in the data provided online, is that this was in the Mindanao Peace and Development Assistance Agreement with Minda. It's 144.87 million. Okay, that's for Minda alone. But in the Mindanao Trust Fund, which I think is ending this month, it received 1.5 billion pesos from the different funding agencies, including the United States. Currently, the United States has provided more than 228 billion pesos over the last 20 years. Now, it could be that this amount does not include Minda, or it could be included, or funding that comes from the US government and has not been reflected on this one. But we take a look at this data alone for the last 20 years, we have 228 billion pesos, but this is for the Philippines. And we take, for example, just 144.87 million given to Minda for the last, as of 2018. That amount is huge. Assuming this was implemented and put into Mindanao, has there been any positive impact to the community? That's the question. Thank you. So that's, I think, my presentation, and I would be happy to engage into a discussion. I will, let's see, how do I start this one? Weng?
Yes. Thank you so
Yeah,
much, Attorney Neil. Wow.
Sandali, do I have to, I stop share, okay.
Wow. Indeed, it was a deep examination of the Mindanao conflict. Thank you so much for presenting, facts, evidence-based presentation. Wow. You deserve really an applause, Attorney Neil. I have many things, wow, to keep with me forever. So conflict is like cancer, it's no cure. Then what else? If there is a conflict, there will be no children, no classroom, and then eventually no education. Oh, that's really heartbreaking. But the big challenge really is Where is the big challenge? The big challenge depends on us. The answer to the big challenge depends on everyone. So thank you so much, Attorney Neil, for a very, wow, how they call it? Oh, you leave me speechless, actually. Thank you. So again, reminding our treasured attendees, if you have questions, you can ask the speaker directly, or you can leave your question in the chat box or in section in our FB Live. Okay, anyone? Any brave souls? We still have time, actually. Anyone? Attorney Neil here is more than prepared to address your question.
Yeah, I think one of the important things that we would like to discuss in the class, and especially students, would be in the areas of development assistance coming from countries to Mindanao. Like maybe a good idea to discuss in classroom is to look at the data of how much has been poured and where areas in Mindanao that you have seen improvements. And look at also how our leaders have run the country or have run Mindanao. So mention about governors down to, because if you look at governors down to mayors, and in areas where, you know, supposedly money has been spent wisely, these are the same municipalities and provinces that continue to be poor. So, yeah, there's a question, I think. So the question then is, if we have development assistance and has been spent to Mindanao, how come people are not seeing any improvements? So that's a good, yeah. So that's a good, a good start to open a conversation.
Correct.
I think students would appreciate if they would, by themselves, look at it and share their own opinion. And that the teacher facilitates by maybe guiding them. You know, these are the data, blah 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 blah. And in your experience, in your area, in say Lanao, what have you observed? Your leaders, your community, and your education. And a discussion could be done along that topic. But I'm not saying that because of development assistance there's actually expected output of, say, development, because it could be that the assistance is aggravating. I'll give an example, Ms. Wing, if I have time.
Yes, sir.
According to the survey of the World Bank, this was about 3 years ago, for any program coming from any country to have substantial impact in the community, like Mindanao, that project must have a lifespan of at least 10 years. Now, no country in the world would provide a grant more than 5 years. USAID for single projects are only 5-year lifespan. Because again, budget requirements. So what does it mean? So because it has only a lifespan of 5 years that we are no longer doing it, or it's no longer effective? No. What is the problem is that the 5-year period is given to the local community or the host country, for the host country to continue doing it. The development assistance is not practically the sole job of the funders and say, oh, here's the money, you develop it. And we will develop it this way and that way. And then that's it. No, it's a seed money. Suppose it's seed money that once you have the money, you make use of that and you contribute into that money so that once the funder is out, you can continue to run the project. The problem is that once the project has ended, people also disappear. Like peace education. As an example, we gave the grant of peace education to, say, MSU, Atty, Marawi, or to a person. The expectation is that once it is there and once we're about to leave, once the grant is about to expire, you make use of that it remains grounded. In most cases, in most projects, it revolves around what is trending. Peace. Oh, let's do peace. Once the project ends or has ended, go to another project again. And there is no continuity because it is not coordinated on the ground. Usually, young people would do peace education, peace camp, let's do peace, peace, peace. But there's no continuity because it ends when people disappear. Supposedly, the program partner, if you're serious about your projects, you connect it with the institutions on the ground, school, private, and the like. Because once the project ends, it continues to thrive. So I have been overseeing a lot of projects, and 98% of the projects are like that. And you have the same people, and this is a problem. You bring in the same people who are already members of the choir. Why do you bring in people who are already members of the choir? Get people who are outsiders who have not been into a project so they know what we are doing. For example, peace education. It's an example in the community. We're bringing the same kind of leaders every now and then, the same people talking about peace and conflict resolution. But the majority of people who have not known or are not aware of peace conflict are actually outside because one, they don't have any credentials for, because remember, when you bring in students, participants, you always look at, have you had any participation? Oh, this is a student leader. No, that's why my policy. If I have a program, I would have one. Half of that are student leaders. The other half would be those who have not been into a program, so that they would learn also with the learners about what's going on in their communities. Anyway, thank you. And
ayan, so yan talaga si Atty. Neil. You'll learn so much from him if you'll just give him time. So if you have time with him, no dull moments, really. Thank you again, Atty. Neil. I forgot to mention, thanks to the U.S. Embassy Manila, our forever ally. Thank you for all the donations, the help, and everything. And the challenge there really is the sustainability of the programs and the projects. All right, so questions from our attendees? So we have here, okay, very informative presentation. Good morning po, Sir Neil. I realize the importance of attaining personal peace from the core team. From Doc Jo, thanks, Sir Neil, for the very enlightening presentation. And from Sir Muhammad, okay, inquire lang po kay Sir Neil, papaano po makakatulong ang governance education to solve the conflict here where sa Mindanao. Makakatulong po ba siya if we included it as a scope ng peace education? Okay, let's start the questions.
So, Sir Muhammad, in any, first of all, the conflict in Mindanao also is a product of poor governance. And I did not include that because I think it's not my business to look at politics. But I just look at data, and maybe from there you can continue the conversation. It seems to me that, so there was a conversation between, I give this very, I would say, enlightening conversation between, this was a book written by, I don't know, Sarah Pandit. This was an American Muslim woman who has traveled to a lot of countries and has observed Muslim majority countries do their own project on the ground. And so there was a conversation between Muslim leaders and the conservative Muslim leaders and the moderate voices in the Islam world. And they had a discussion. The long and short of it was that at the end of the meeting, when they talk about how come there's poor governance, how come that there's problems, and one thing that nobody disagreed was the problem is about leadership. It's about leadership. So I don't want to cite a specific person, but look at your data from the first governor of the arm, the former arm. First 3 governors in the arm. That how culture contributed to and how money was spent. There's a data in the COA. You can actually take a peek on that one. And you would explain it to us, why is it that the conflict remains in that? So I go back to the original idea that governance is a product also of our own culture. If you belong to the Maranao, Mindanao, Tausug, or other ethnicities in Mindanao, this contributes into the kind of governance we have. In the barn, for example. Education, I go back to that one. First, before education, there was, BARM has passed, all laws for the BARM. And one of the serious contending issues that has not been resolved is that how come that BARM has not passed a real, genuine laws on land? Because land is the major source of redo in Mindanao. There's a conflict between BIFF and MILF between people in Lanao, because practically most in the areas within the BARM, Muslim majority communities, the problem is about land ownership. There is no land titling, because again, based on the culture of clan, the Dato just say, oh, this is ours, no more titling. For as long as it's in my power and domain, then it's ours. But it doesn't work that way outside BARM. So I know the BARM is struggling still because they are still, they are only given period of time to pass laws within the BARM. And land is actually maybe part of the agenda and maybe not the priority for now, but maybe the coming. So the answer to that, Mr. Muhammad, is that governance is vital. But governance is not just because you have one people coming from one or dominated by one ethnicity. It has to be run by people who have the competence and expertise. Do we have the competence and expertise? Yes or no? From there. Do we have an inclusive participation of people from different ethnicities and cultures? Yes or no? Have we followed the financial procedures? Yes or no, in spending that money? So these are things that include into the governance aspect. And what is the answer to that one? You know better than me. So I think the discussion in the classroom should be, look at the following indicators and factors on how a good governance should be. And from there, continue to check 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and let the students discuss rather than us, dominate the conversation. But you're correct. Governance is an important issue that we all should be willing to find an answer and make sacrifices, because Mindanao is a confluence of not just one culture but several. And if you deny one culture, then it becomes complicated. Thank you.
All right, so we hope that we satisfy you. Attorney Neil satisfied you, Sir Muhammad.
There's another question, Ms. Weng.
Yeah, another one. Can you still take one question?
Yes, one last. It's okay. One last.
Okay.
Before we give the floor to John. He's ready already.
So one from Mr. Ado, with a clear data on development assistance presented by you. Is there any project in Mindanao institutionalized or established which until now is utilized or sustained? Okay, what does it mean? Why are you laughing?
Sure. So this is my answer to your question. I have not found one. This is how I do it. So I look at the program and gauge its own sustainability and its long-term impact. There could be maybe 1 or 2 or 3, maybe so many, but I have not found one yet. Either because I have not done much research or have not studied more, or seen it because I haven't I have not been into that one. And again, if you look at the situation in Mindanao, especially in the conflict areas, it seems to me that I do not see of any project that has been utilized to maintain the stability of the community or something. So sorry, I have not found one because of that reason.
That's very direct answer to your question, Sir Adonis. Someone is trying. Not yet, no clear. All right. Okay. So, Sir Neil, one more? No. So thank you so much, Attorney Neil Pacamalan, for wow, very engaging topic. Thank you all. Thank you for presenting to us latest facts and everything. So the challenge again, the answer to the challenges depend on everyone and us. Thank you. All right. So are you still okay, our treasured attendees? Are you now ready for the next speaker? Okay, for our next speaker, he is a young peace builder based in Mindanao. Currently, he is a project associate at the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, a life psychometrician. He has worked on different projects on conflict transformation in development for both local and international organizations. He has finished his master's degree in international peace studies and global politics from the UN-mandated University for Peace and the Ateneo de Manila University, respectively. He was also a fellow of the Future Bridging Leadership Program by the Asian Institute of Management. His research interest is focused on the intersection of political psychology, peace, and gender. So to talk about conflict transformation, moving beyond resolution. So our treasured attendees, beloved attendees, ladies and gentlemen, let's have my brother. Hello, John. Mr. John K. Badawi.
Hello everyone, good morning.
Good
I
morning,
am now
John.
gonna share my screen. Wait lang. All right. So here it is. Um, so there. Ma'am, can you see full
Yes,
screen?
no. Still black. Okay, yan na.
Ayan. All right. So, good morning, everyone. My name is John Badawi, and for today, I will be talking about conflict transformation. And actually, when I was invited for this session, I was asked to talk about conflict resolution, and provide new perspective on conflict resolution. And I think what more could be new, more fresh perspective than introducing to you the discourse and the practice of conflict transformation. Um, I think Sir Neil also gave a very good introduction already, but just a disclaimer that I am not gonna be talking about, the Bangsamoro peace process, for example. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to do that, so I'm not gonna be talking about that. I think for this morning, the value that I can add to you, and when you go back to your classroom, is give you new perspectives, give you new lenses in looking at our situation here in Mindanao, in looking at your classroom, in your connection with your students, and maybe some content also. So for the flow of my discussion, so I will first talk about we will revisit conflict. Although Sir Neil already give a very robust information already about conflict. And then I will proceed with discussing conflict management and resolution. And then I will talk about the limitations of conflict resolution and management, and the need to extend the discourse and practice to more resilient na perspectives, which is conflict transformation. And then I'm going to be linking conflict transformation and peace education. And then at the end, I'm going to be posing some questions for reflection, I think, for all of us. Um, I feel like the topic on conflict transformation and peace education, I feel like is both an end and a means of conflict transformation. So I really see the relevance and the connection of these topics sa inyo bilang kayo ay either you have taught peace education or you will be teaching peace education in the future. But to officially start my discussion, I'm gonna be talking a little bit about myself. So I am from I'm based in Mindanao now, but I am also from Mindanao. I actually grew up in Maguindanao, and I think that's relevant because the topic on peace and conflict is very close to my heart. I think growing in a community where exposed to armed conflict, I was exposed to violence and conflict, kumbaga na-experience ko siya when I was growing up, and even until now we experience it. And I'm actually very happy also to know that most of the participants here are mostly from Mindanao. I guess we have that shared pain and experience, pain coming from our experiences, but at the same time, we have that shared hope also that things can be better and things will be better with our collective na mga action in our own little ways. So anyhow, starting in college days, I remember that I have always been involved with initiatives na related to peace. I think when I was in college, that was around the time of framework agreement on the Bangsamoro and the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro. So I remember back then na talagang parang in our own little ways with my friends and my colleagues, we have been contributing little ways again sa peace process. Um, And actually now I work for an organization that does conflict mediation and dialogue, and of course that does conflict transformation also. But for this morning, I am not officially representing my employer organization. I'm not here as a project associate of the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, but more so I'm here as a young Mindanaoan. I'm here as a young Magindanaoan and a young scholar practitioner who would like to share to you about conflict transformation. When you talk about conflict transformation, and when you actually talk about peace, at the heart of it is the discussion on conflict and the need to understand conflict. And I think Attorney Neil again already gave us an idea kung how does conflict manifest in Mindanao, especially in Muslim Mindanao. But just to give you a definition, in 1994, Put and Kim defined conflict as the perceived divergences of interest or a belief that the parties' current aspirations cannot be achieved simultaneously. And I think this encompasses the usual definition of conflict na usually may mga goals na hindi incompatible, may mga hindi pagkakaunawan, hindi pagkakaintindihan, at mga hindi pagkakasundo. Sometimes people think then na parang conflict is zero sum, which essentially means that yung pinag-aawayan natin ng bagay, yung pinag-aagawan natin, let's put it that way, if I get it, you will get nothing. Or if you get it, I will get nothing. Yung parang that kind of framing na zero sum, di ba? Na parang only one party can win sometimes, which as we will learn later on, is not necessarily the case. And I think one important feature also of conflict is that it's universal to human society. So all of us living in the planet right now, in all societies, we experience conflict and it's normal and it's part of our life. But to dig deeper on conflict, let's look at this the presentation actually. So conflict can be a lot of things. It can be waged constructively. When ang ibig sabihin nito, conflict as as a paano ba, means for social change can be waged constructively. So that's why meron tayong mga non-violent na mga movements. Maybe you've heard of, nakikita natin sa TV yung mga rallies, demonstrations, sit-ins. Those are examples of constructive and I guess positive na mga non-violent movements. And then there are also on the other side of the coin, those that are destructive. So those that who would like social change, but they would choose taking up arms or being aggressive or being violent in their pursuit of social change. And at the outset, I would like to say that I do not endorse violence. I do not endorse aggression. But at the same time, I understand also those groups who choose to arms, because I mean, I think an example nito, for example, now in the Philippines are, for example, NPAs or even before MI left, they take up arms and parang the usual judgment ng mga tao na not from around the area, parang they are bad people because they choose to take up arms. But I think for me, again, I do not endorse violence, but you also see the need for sometimes for some people to do that. Or conflict also can be emotive-based or instrumental-based. When we say emotive-based, essentially, this talks about grievance, yung mga legit na mga grievances. For example, example nito, for example, injustices or inequalities or oppression, yung something that we feel grievance natin, sentiments natin na parang legit siya. Nafe-feel natin, for example, na unfair ang treatment ng government to our community compared to another community. So that's a grievance. It's emotive-based. And conflict can also be instrumental-based or ito yung tinatawag nila na parang greed, di ba? I think we know about greed, di ba? So essentially, when you talk about instrumental-based sometimes, the discussion is more about on motivations that could be self-serving or even selfish sometimes. So ayun siya. Ito yung, I think, I'm not sure if you've heard of the discussion on greed versus grieve. Grievance versus greed. So essentially, ito siya, emotive-based and instrumental-based. And conflict can also be symmetrical and asymmetrical. When we talk about symmetrical and asymmetrical, essentially we're talking about power dynamics. Symmetrical means that two parties in conflict, meron silang more or less the same power versus asymmetrical na one party has more power compared to the other. So symmetrical, example ng symmetrical for example are horizontal na mga conflicts or even I think some read are also symmetrical. I think they are symmetrical of course. And symmetrical for example niya ay the usual na parang state versus non-state na mga group. State being the more powerful party and then the non-state na parang lesser na power. But of course you can even nuance this because kahit kasi yung mga tinatawag natin na mga symmetrical na mga conflict, meron pa rin power dynamics yan eh. So kahit tinatawag natin silang horizontal or symmetrical, meron pa din diyang one group that is more or less more powerful than the other. But I think the trend now globally is that it has moved to more asymmetrical. So if you look at the conflicts now all over the globe, mas nagiging communal siya. Communal, mas nagiging one group versus the other. So mas nagiging symmetrical. And then conflict could also be protracted and intractable. So I think that's the case of Mindanao also. This means that some conflicts can be enduring. They are perennial. Ibig sabihin, problema sila ng mga magulang natin, conflict sila ng mga lolo natin noon na hanggang ngayon, conflict pa din na kinakaharap natin. So protracted siya and sometimes violent na conflict. And conflict can also be interpersonal or intergroup or interstate or intrastate. It could even be like on a personal level, but our unit of discussion for today is more on intergroup and I think interstate also. And lastly, conflict can be manifest and then latent. Latent is manifest essentially means that we observe it, we see it, we hear it, and then we feel it. Latent naman yung hindi pa siya nagka-come out in the open. So andyan pa siya, brewing pa siya na conflict. Tension pa lang siguro siya, pero hindi pa natin siya directly na-observe. So ayan siya. But generally, when we talk about conflict, it's usually a very complex na dynamics. I think in the change management world, we have the term of VUCA world. And essentially, VUCA world means it's actually, ano yung tawag dito? Yan, ano yung tawag dito? Basta yan, ano yung tawag? V stands for volatile, U stands for uncertain, and A stands for ambiguous, and then C stands for nakapalitang A at saka C. Pero VUCA siya, complex. And I think also conflict is like that, you know, a lot of things are changing. There's ang dami nating hindi alam, ang daming mga sudden na mga changes. For example, sino yung nakakaalam 2 years ago na magkakaroon ng COVID? And because COVID also, meron siyang naging implication sa peace and conflict dito sa Mindanao and globally. And hindi natin alam kung ano yung mangyayari bukas or for the coming years. So a lot of things will change, a lot of sudden changes will happen. And it's complex. That's I think, yun yung parang pinaka-bottom line complex. So understanding all of this begs the question, how can we make systems, mechanisms, and processes that are resilient to disruptions? Paano tayo makakagawa ng mga spaces and processes na despite all of these changes going on around us, despite the complexity, magiging resilient yung response natin. And I think diyan pumapasok yung conflict transformation as a resilient perspective, and I will discuss more about it later on. But before that, actually, I would like to talk about conflict versus war because I think a lot of people are also confused about this, that they tend to put value judgment to conflict as undesirable. So ibig sabihin, a lot of people do not like conflict, and maybe rightly so. But it's important to differentiate between conflict and war. Magkaiba kasi ang conflict and war. Again, I said earlier, conflict is universal. It's a normal part of our life. But how we resolve that conflict, how we resolve our incompatible goals, doon na magmamatter na kung ano yung options na pipiliin natin, di ba? And as peace builders and as teachers of peace education, of course, we want to choose those options that are peaceful, that are non-violent. So I think the idea is that we have to normalize conflict and accept conflict because it will have an implication on how we resolve conflict. I think what's not normal is that kung meron tayong hindi pagkakaintindihan, may dalawang grupo ng mga tao or communities na may mga hindi pagkakaintindihan and they resolve to killing each other or going to war, yun yung ayaw nating i-normalize. Pero again, I would like to put emphasis again that it's okay to have conflict, but how we resolve that conflict then matters. And we want to choose those na hindi destructive and hindi nakakasira ng buhay, hindi nakakasira ng gamit, hindi nakakasira ng community. And in the literature now actually, and in practice of course, there's a lot of ways kung paano natin isosolve ang conflict. So I think the usual na parang discourse ay conflict management, conflict resolution, and relatively new ay ang conflict transformation. So when we talk about, so let's look at this. So these are the usual na, and also now na mga ginagamit na mga interventions. So we have conflict management, conflict resolution, and then conflict transformation. Essentially, when we talk about conflict management, it entails the work on peacekeeping. So this includes ceasefires, things related to security, military disengagement, reduction of violence, humanitarian assistance, and in other places maraming mga UN na peacekeeping, pero dito sa Philippines wala naman tayong UN na peacekeeping na mga troops, di ba? But in other na mga parts, in the other parts of the world na may mga conflict, andun may mga peacekeeping na mga forces. And then we also have works na related to conflict resolution. So conflict resolution essentially includes, the usual that we know, negotiation, mediation, problem-solving workshops, and dialogue. Yun siya, yung the peacemaking entails those kind of work. And then lastly, meron tayong tinatawag na na conflict transformation and the work it entails on peace building, which essentially includes na yung mga sinabi na din ni Sir Neil kanina, for example, in development, even human rights, democratization, or strengthening civil society, reconciliation, and then reconstruction even. But at the bottom, at the top, let's start at the top. Let's start at the top. Makikita mo na parang conflict analysis or assessment of conflict is integral in the three. And at the bottom, you can see negative peace and positive peace. So yung conflict management is essentially leaning towards negative peace. So, again, military disengagement, ceasefire, stopping the war. And then conflict transformation on the other side of the spectrum is more on, having things that are positive. So whether that's development, whether that's justice, or, and whatnot. But the usual, even starting mga siguro post World War II, the usual narrative discourse and practice is really centered on conflict management and conflict resolution. Very recently lang, I think, na-introduce yung idea ng conflict transformation. Although what it entails is actually somehow integrated na din sa resolution, pero magkaiba siya as we will see later on. But if you see this model now as the escalation and the escalation model, we'll see the trajectory of a conflict or of violent conflict. You see the difference, contradiction, polarization, violence, and we see, and then it's going down to ceasefire agreement, normalization, and reconciliation. Pero most of the literature, and I think ayong usually sa discourse and practice, mostly dito siya, for example, na when there's war, how do we stop that war? So conflict management, and then how can we resolve that war? So conflict resolution. So again, hindi pa masyado integrated dito yung idea ng transformation. How do we integrate transformation? But conflict resolution na work actually, let's go back here. Here na siya na focus sa ceasefire. Usually entails action again to bring hostile parties to agreement, but it's broader than conflict termination. Why? Because the root causes ng isang conflict often persist without war or peace settlement. And relatedly, efforts to resolve conflict may not end war, and relatedly, efforts to end a war may not resolve underlying conflicts. Because usually, I think let's look at the peace process here in Mindanao. Ang daming mga spoiler na mga groups. Ang daming mga spoiler na groups and ang daming mga situations that can also spoil the peace process. And then of course, marami pang various other factors na pwedeng maka-spoil dun sa peace process. For example, whether that's lack of political will from the parties, or whether that's lack of state capacity, or whether that's lack of trust, 'di ba? So ang daming mga factors na makaka-shake nung peace process. So knowing all of that begs the question again. Knowing that conflict resolution and peace process pwede mag-recur ang conflict, paano tayo makakagawa ng systems and spaces and processes na kahit babalik yung conflict, kahit may mas-spoil yung conflict, hindi tayo babalik sa giyera, hindi tayo babalik sa war. And I think that's the value that conflict transformation can add. Because if you look at this is very famous because I think you also do this in your class, Galtong's negative peace and positive peace I mentioned earlier. Ang conflict management is more focused on the absence of violence, war, cessation of immediate and direct violence, but it may not be sustainable over time since yung root causes ng conflict can prevail. But ang conflict resolution naman somehow also leaning on negative peace, but at the same time, may mga part siya na on the positive peace part. So that's going beyond the absence of direct violence and aiming for the elimination ng mga structural and cultural violence, and then promoting social justice and reconciliation. But really at the heart of conflict transformation, we will see later on, ay dito, of course, both actually, at stopping war stopping direct violence, and then at the same time, addressing structural and cultural violence. So there's one famous scholar, and he's my bias also. So most of the materials I will present and I have presented is actually mostly from the ideas of John P. Lederach. So John P. Lederach, buhay pa siya, ang dami niyang books about conflict transformation, and I think he's also one of the pioneers of conflict transformation, and he's one of the scholar practitioners who really delve into conflict transformation. But he defined conflict transformation as envisioning and responding to the ebb and flow of social conflict as life-giving opportunities for creating constructive change processes that reduce violence, increase justice in direct interaction and social structures, and respond to real-life problems in human relationships. So I feel like personally, I feel like this is a very holistic na definitions because ang dami niya acknowledgement dito. For example, ang dami ang ina-acknowledge na that conflict is part of our human life, it's normal, it's universal, and it's even sometimes life-giving opportunities for constructive na mga change processes. And also here you can see also that it also talks about negative peace in terms of reducing violence, but it goes beyond that because it extends to increasing justice in direct interaction and social structures. And at the heart of conflict transformation actually ay relationships, di ba? So later on you will see that I will talk a lot about relationships. So relationships kasi are important and nasa puso siya din ng conflict transformation. So again, this perspective is relatively new and provides a different perspective sa conflict resolution. And it actually extends yung idea ng conflict resolution. So let's see the difference of conflict resolution and conflict transformation. So essentially, when you talk about resolution, the main question na tinatanong niya ay how do we end something not desirable? For example, how do we end war? Or how do we end violence? But as you can see sa conflict transformation perspective, it goes beyond that. It asks the question, same kay resolution na, yes, how do we end something na ayaw natin, not desirable, but at the same time, how can we build something na desirable? If you can see here, going back sa resolution, it guides our thinking toward bringing some set of events or issues to an end. So in a sense, meron siyang definitiveness and finality. And conflict resolution, on the other hand, is more, it's process oriented. So essentially, hindi niya ina-acknowledge yung parang finality or definitiveness. Next difference, actually, conflict resolution perspective, mas focus siya sa content-centered. Ibig sabihin ng content-centered, for example, if may problema online, for example, si Sir Neil, nag-mention siya kanina na parang at one of the main causes ng RIDO or ng mga conflict dito sa Mindanao ay land. Ang kapag conflict resolution na perspective, focus lang siya dun sa main issue, dun sa land. Pero when you extend that to conflict transformation na perspective, it goes beyond the content and actually sees the context and kung ano yung mga relationship na andon sa grupo ng mga tao na yon or dun sa mga community na yon. So going back to conflict resolution, ayun nga, focus doon sa issue na doon. Kaya minsan, nagiging technique-centered siya. So parang, kaya siguro ang daming mga trainings, and sa literature din, ang daming mga inputs on negotiation, mediation, di ba ganon? Kasi, for example, how can we negotiate land conflict? How can we mediate that land conflict? How can we mediate that RIDO na focus on land conflict? Di ba? So it's very content-centered. Pero if you again look at sa conflict transformation, gusto niya i-build yung relationship. Gusto niya intindihin kung ano yung underlying na relationship andun sa conflict na yon. Kasi yung relationship na yon also meron siyang connection dun sa content or dun sa pinaka-main na issue. Next one ay conflict resolution perspective tries to achieve an agreement and solution to the presenting problem, creating the crisis. So yun yung parang sinabi ko kanina. So, okay, meron tayong problema about land. So let's have a solution sa land conflict na yon. So it's very focused on that presenting problem and that crisis and giving solution to that problem. Whereas if you put it in a conflict transformation perspective, the focus now is on promoting constructive na change processes. So essentially, hindi lang yung presenting crisis yung tinitignan mo, but you go beyond that. You look at the presenting problem or yung crisis as somehow as a window, as kumbaga bintana siya na pwede nating gamitin para masilip kung ano pa yung mga underlying na mga bigger na mga structural na mga problema na reason kung bakit at the first place merong crisis na yon or merong presenting problem na yon. Next one ay related dun sa sinabi ko earlier, but in terms of time frame, we can see that conflict resolution is short-term. Short-term ang kanyang vision in terms of relieving pain, anxiety, and difficulties. So essentially, ibig sabihin nito, okay, let's solve because yung land conflict na to, nakakadulot siya ng anxiety, nakakadulot siya ng difficulties, nakakadulot siya ng pain, nakakadulot siya ng gulo. So let's solve that. And just at that, kumbaga, view na parang let's solve that, and then without seeing na pwede siya mag-recur or pwede siya maulit. Pero sa conflict transformation na perspective, it looks at the horizon for change, mid to long range, and is intentionally crisis responsive than crisis driven because conflict resolution is crisis driven. So essentially, ang conflict transformation mas sustainable siya na pagtingin ng mga bagay. So earlier may pinresent ako kanina, naalala nyo yung parang hill or yung mountain, 'di ba? Na parang at the peak is the war, 'di ba? Yung parang trajectory ng conflict na difference, polarization, and at the peak merong war, and then going down to ceasefire, normalization, agreement, and all of that. I think because if we look at conflict that it's very ano sa tingin nyo, 'di ba? If you look at it as a mountain, very very static, 'di ba? Hindi siya nagmo-move. But because the reality of conflicts, hindi siya static, it's dynamic. So it's important to look at it more like a wave na ang daming mga ups and downs, na may mga moments na may mga peak. Ibig sabihin ng peak, yun yung mga nakikita natin na war, nakikita natin ng mga symptoms, nakikita natin ng mga crisis, and then it goes down, and then it recurs again. But most importantly, kailangan natin makita yung waves na to as part of the bigger ocean. So essentially, the ocean is the context, di ba? Kasi kung titinignan mo lang siya na focus dun sa waves, nalilimutan natin na yung waves na yon part siya ng bigger na ocean. And essentially, that's why I like conflict transformation, no? Because it acknowledges the wave, but at the same time, it sees and it looks at the ocean. So, I think that's beautiful. Sorry, mag-moment lang ako. I think that's a really beautiful metaphor of conflict. But sana yun. I think just to wrap up the idea of conflict transformation, binibigyan niya tayo ng tatlong lenses. Binibigyan niya tayo ng lens at looking at the immediate situation. And then, at the same time, it gives us another lens ng underlying patterns and conflict ng context ng immediate situation na yon. And lastly, it gives us a lens na nagbibigay sa atin ng conceptual framework kung ano yung relationship ng immediate situation dun sa mga underlying patterns and context na yon. Essentially, to address yung content, and then the context, and then the structure of the conflict. So now the question is that, parang, sir, parang yung pinresent mo very for, parang peace builder, very for like, working for NGO, working on the ground on conflict. But it's important to connect now ang conflict transformation sa peace education because this is a peace education project. Kailangan natin makita kung ano yung connection niya, ano yung implication ng conflict transformation sa peace education. So unang-una, as a window, kumbaga bintana siya na pwede natin acknowledgement din ni conflict transformation. Our journey to peace is a personal it's a personal journey. So essentially, as teachers, this returns to us ba, parang back to us, back to you, back to us, the question tuloy of how how are we part of the solution? Because most of the time, ganyan yung nakikita natin, di ba, na parang, teacher kami, nagtuturo kami ng peace education, part kami ng solution. But sometimes nakakalimutan also na maybe, perhaps, we are also part of the problem. Di ba? So again, it's a personal journey of looking at kung ano yung mga personal biases natin na nadadala natin sa classroom na pwede mag-influence kung paano tayo nagiging teacher, paano tayo nagtuturo ng peace education. Siguro on a personal note and a personal experience. For example, for me, when I was growing up, and even now, dito sa amin, usually, although relatively peaceful naman, but I can feel na may gap pa din sa mga between Muslim, Christians, and indigenous people. For example, even the term we use when we refer to non-Muslims, we use, for example, Bisaya. Bisaya is essentially an encompassing term that we use to refer to all non-Muslims. And I think parang same din for mga non-Muslims also din, na parang kung how they call us, na parang Muslims, doesn't matter whether you're Maguindanao or Mindanao, but you're all Muslim to us. Pero ang point kasi, yung mga ganitong mga ginagamit ng mga terms na nakuha natin sa paglaki natin, na part ng personality, ng pagkatao natin, nadadala natin yan. And they also color our lenses. So importante na ang ating journey to conflict transformation, as we bring it to the classroom, ay aware, meron dapat self-awareness kung ano yung mga biases natin na to at paano natin siya nadadala sa classroom. Kasi importante yon. Next one, conflict transformation and peace education, is that the question ba of how can we build relationship in the classroom? Siguro this is more relevant in the context in Mindanao, because in Mindanao, iba't iba tayo sa classroom. Merong mga differences, of course, in terms of our ethnicities. May mga Maguindanao, may mga Cebuano, iba-iba, may mga Muslim, may mga Christian, may mga indigenous people. So iba't iba. But essentially, kasi yung mga pagkakaiba na to, may mga cleavages sa relationship na yan. Siguro at kailangan i-acknowledge natin ngayon pa lang na may mga gaps, may mga cleavages sa relationship na yan. So the question of paano natin gagamitin yung classroom natin para mag-build ng mga relationship na to by using dialogue. But dialogue, not just na parang talking, di ba? But dialogue leveraging on symbols, on arts, on music, on sports, on stories, di ba? And I think Sir Mayong last week gave us very good example of how they use dialogue, not just talking, but also really going beyond that, as for example, using music. And I think that's beautiful, no? Because we explore creative and mga innovative na mga spaces and mga practices to actually dialogue between one another and to build relationships. Next one related to this is that the point of fostering an environment that teaches students to be critical and appreciate complexity. Because the way I see it is that the usual na parang sometimes sa classroom, and maybe for some peace education ng mga classes, oh yeah, we teach what is peace, what is conflict, or we teach what is gender, we teach what is Islam and peace. But we don't really give our students that critical lens ba, and that appreciation of complexity, that ang reality natin are more complex. And ang point ko is that sa classroom, pwede tayo mag-foster ng that kind of environment ba na pwede natin ipa-embrace sa mga estudyante natin yung complexity ng mga bagay. Because bakit importante yun? Una-una, because when we embrace complexity, when our students embrace complexity, meron siyang implication din on how they look at resolving problems, how they look at resolving conflicts, na because it's complex, kailangan multi-sectoral siya, kailangan it should involve a lot of people, kailangan ang daming perspective na pwede natin, na we should include because nga it's complex. And also to help our students look beyond yung mga issues, look beyond sa mga issues and really ask yung mga big and mga scary na mga questions. So that's another one, no? And then next one is that related to that is that paano natin mabibigyan ng iba't ibang lenses yung mga estudyante natin in looking at reality, di ba? Whether that's using the lens of religion, of culture, of gender, pero paano natin magagamit and how can we reconcile these different na mga lenses na kailan na ituturo natin sa mga estudyante natin para din mas rich and mas critical yung pagtingin nila sa mga bagay sa mundo, sa conflict. And then lastly, what I like about conflict transformation also is that it's a reflective process. It means that and this goes back to you as teachers is that paano tayo magiging reflective in our day-to-day interaction with our students na paano tayo magiging reflective dun sa tinuro natin, paano tayo magiging reflective na parang ano pa yung parang pwede nating maturo sa mga estudyante natin na mas maganda at mas makakatulong sa kanila. Sorry, reflective and I think naman at I mentioned earlier at the is a transformation. I think may book si one pioneers of research in the Philippines, example, sila Professor Castro and sila Galase, di ba? Meron silang chapter dun sa book nila on how peace education is a transformative education. So, yeah, I mean, my point here again for this specific slide is that at the heart of conflict transformation is peace education. Again, as both an end and as a means of pursuing peace. So with that, and actually on the note of being a reflective process, I would like to end my talk by leaving these questions to you. Sana yun? That I mentioned earlier. That when we go back to our classroom later, we get to reflect and maybe answer these questions. The first one, what are my personal biases that may affect my role as a teacher? How am I part of the problem and the solution? Second, how can I make my classroom a space for building relationships? Third, what innovative and creative strategies I can use for dialogue in building those relationships? And then fourth, what lenses do my students need to make sense of the social reality? And fifth, how can I foster an environment to cultivate critical and system thinking among my students? Um, so with that, I end my talk. Ma'am, back to you. And yeah, if you have questions or may mga part kayo na hindi naintindihan, please let me know or kung time na you can even chat me later on. But I think you pick up something that can help you in your classroom when you go back to your classes. So, Ma'am, back to you.
Okay, bravo, John. You never fail to amaze me. So thank you so much for your presentation. So too many questions, but the answers are too few. All right, so we welcome now questions from our attendees. Oh no, questions from our attendees. You have? Hello, everyone. Are you still okay? Naman. So thank you, John. What I like about your talk, yung mga mountains mo and the waves. It's part of the
mga
bigger
waves,
ocean, the
pa-ocean.
ups and downs. Oh, at least may bago akong natutunan today. Talaga.
Oo. Siguro
Salamat.
I forgot to mention earlier na parang, siguro din because when I was in college, I had experiences na yung mga teacher mismo yung parang, sometimes nafe-feel mo yung biases nila and nafe-feel mo yung parang pinanggalingan din nila and nadadala sa classroom na hindi siya masyado na ganon hindi siya ganun kaganda nga kasi nakakuan yung classroom yun nagtiteacher. So yung point ko lang siguro yun, yung parang, ayun, paano natin sa personal, as personal journey natin bilang mga teachers and bilang mga peace builders. So ikaw, Ma'am Weng, back to you pala.
Correct. When you got emotional kanina, parang na-feel ko din yung na-feel mo. Oh. Alam mo naman, we're on the same boat since 2014, diba? Alam mo naman anong pinaglalaban natin. Okay, so we have one new message. Allow me to read. Thank you. Okay, for
Kanina pa yan.
kanina pa pala to. True
Oo.
lang. Okay,
True mo isa
anyone?
din true.
So no questions, meaning everything is absorbed? Or maybe you may share additional insights or let's say experiences. Pwede? Anyone? Or may I call? Any representative? Sino yung nakita ko dito? Si Sir Maula. Maula. Wala ko na
Ayan, tawagan na.
So, tawagan na. Sir Maula? Kasi siya yung nakikita ko dito sa window. Hello? So, let me check if you're still there, if you're still alive. Hello, Sir Maula? Hi! Kaway-kaway lang. Wala ba kayong mga tanong dyan? Ayun. Would you like to ask questions, sir? Or wala yata. From MSU Mindanao, and a representative. Ayan, pagkakataon na to kasi John is with us. Galing pa to sa, ano university yun, John? University of Peace.
Yeah.
Talagang magagamit natin ito when we, pag na-mainstream na talaga yung peace ed. Kahit sa amin siguro, pwede na. Pero pa, we will wait for the right time. Ayan, thanks so much, John. I like your dimension of the dynamic systems perspective of looking at conflict towards not only for conflict resolution, but importantly for effective conflict resolution. And John.
Yes, thank you, Ma'am Bobet.
Hey, thank you for a very informative presentation, Sir John from Ravanera. Ayan pa. Wala na. We encourage, from Notre Dame of Hulu College. Hi! Ang dami nila, oh. You have just joined. Welcome. It's our honor to have you today. So would you like to ask questions or some sort of clarification? You still have time. Time check, yes, but 10:50. So we have 10 minutes. Anyone? Okay, thank you, Sir John. Parang thank you lang ito.
Thank you, Sesh.
Thank you. Ayan, kasi kanina pa si actually, ayan. Thanks, John, for that very informative presentation. Can you suggest some strategies that these education teachers can make use in teaching conflict transformation, especially via online classes?
Okay, nice question. Siguro I'll go back to yung parang presentation ni Sir Mayong last week na parang nilagay niya din yung parang elements of peace education, di ba? In terms of content, context, and then andragogy, and then some, I forgot the other one. But siguro that's it. That's in terms of conflict, what transformation can actually add value to our classroom. Di ba? In terms of information as a content, diba? We can teach that. And then another one is context because again nga, diba, yung parang importansya din, parang one of the key feature also of conflict transformation is making sure that understanding yung context, diba? So I think that's important. But in terms of specific strategies naman, I think in relating it to context, it varies also. So I cannot give all of you, for example, one specific strategy that will work for all of you because it's context specific and because the understanding, the premise is that yung mga context na to, iba't iba yung pangangailangan. So for example, one strategy may work maybe in Hulu, but it may not necessarily work in Marawi, di ba? So I think that's also then the reason why yung presentation natin, for example, last week, yung mga strategies nila Sir Mayong, ay pwede natin matutunan yung mga strategies na yun. But on my end, I cannot parang give you parang specific parang strategy or methodology, but what I can siguro give are general parang recommendation in terms of again kung ano yung dapat na gawin on those sa mga classroom. So again, I mentioned earlier yung parang building relationship in the classroom, and then using dialogue, but not just dialogue as talking, and really that traditional mode of Kwanba teaching na parang teacher giving input, but si teacher also meron I guess this is a strategy. Si teacher also, there should be a shift in how teachers look at their roles, diba? Not just as teacher na parang, oh, I teach you this or that, and then you just sit there and listen to me. But also, si teacher, as actively part of the process, as part of the process with the students. So I think that's the key word, is that being with the students and teacher, not just, that hierarchy ba? Because I mentioned earlier also, na si teacher, it's a reflective process, and si teacher can get a lot of reflections, trigger for reflections when they immerse themselves and when they see themselves as with the students in the learning for peace. So I'm not sure if that answered Ma'am Jo's question, but yeah, to be specific, I think that also applies sa online classes. Then the mga strategies, Ma'am Jo. Yeah, I guess so, ayun. And I know din naman na you're doing a lot of great strategies in Marawi already.
Okay, thanks for that, John. So we also encourage our attendees to share your takeaways. So if you have something to share, you are welcome since we still have time. Come on.
Hanggang anong oras tayo, ma'am?
Grab
11?
this opportunity. I think we're until 11 or 11:30. To have the opportunity to share your thoughts about peace, about conflict in Mindanao, whatever you wish to share that's related to the topics today. Pwede. Or shall I begin calling names again?
Or ikaw ba, May? Baka may question ka.
Ako
Or
wala.
mga hindi, okay.
Everything is covered, John. Everything is clear from Sir Neil's presentation down to yours. I'm okay.
Right.
Anyone? Hello? Napaka-quiet natin. That was a very insightful presentation. Thank you from NBJC. Called Jovar. Okay. Hello, Sir Jovar. Sorry.
Sa korte
You
yun.
are recommended.
Oh no, but if there are no questions, I guess we can end naman the call na din, ma'am. The talk if you want also.
Okay. Baka gumagawa pa lang sila dyan.
Okay. That can. Or if they have question kay Sir Neil, because Sir Neil is here pa naman.
Yes.
Maybe they have questions for both of us. We can both answer naman.
Yes, I think Attorney Neil is still here. So yung hindi pa nakapagtanong kanina kay Sir Neil, the line is now open.
Siguro, while people are thinking maybe for questions, I think then importante din yung peace education din sa context. For example, I talk about conflict resolution earlier and then of course transformation. Pero paano natin nakikita, paano tayo nag-support peace process, for example, di ba? Because here now, ang inisip kasi sometimes sa mga tao kapag peace process, kapag nasignan na, okay na, di ba? Peaceful na lahat. Pero the real work begins after the peace agreement is signed. So yan yung reality natin ngayon sa Muslim Mindanao, di ba? So also another question for reflection is that how as teachers, how can we use our classroom to somehow either inform our students about the process, about what's going on, or how can we actively contribute to that peace process, whether the students, doing advocacy campaigns about the peace process, or really going outside the classroom to contribute sa peace process. So I think that also. Can we ask copies of the presentation? Yeah, I'll send the copy.
As FPE professor, are we allowed to use hadith or Quran verses to include in our instruction from MSU Dean? So would you like to address it, John?
I think Sir Neil can also answer that, but I will also answer also na parang, are we allowed? Again, it depends on your context, sir. So I'm not sure if I'm the right person to say that, oh, go ahead, use Quranic verse, diba? Because, for example, if your students in LNCAT are Christians, then hindi siya masyado relevant. So, but if you see as teachers na relevant and useful ang paggamit ng Quranic verses in your class, then by all means do that, diba? I think in the previous iteration of the Peace Ed project in MSU, may mga topics doon, for example, na parang Islam and peace, for example. And I think gumamit din doon ng mga Quranic verses. Ganon. So, yun, pwede gamitin doon. So, again, sir, I'm not sure, yun, kayo po yung parang din makaka-decide kung, ayun, kung sakto ba gumamit ng Quranic verses sa class nyo or not, di ba? Hindi naman kami di masyado, kayo nakakalam ng context um, ko yun. So, dapat klaro din kung what's the purpose to begin with of including Quranic verses. Diba? So, dapat klaro sa atin kung gusto natin mag-add ng mga ganun. So, Sir Neil, I think you want to add something?
Yes.
And thank you, Ms. Weng. Yeah, so thank you for the question. This is a part of, I think, inclusiveness of participants and the topic itself, that whenever possible, people should be given the chance to share their own culture and their own religion related to the discussion. I would rather encourage students to freely share their own ideas through the use of Quranic verses and the like, because it helps people who are not Muslims to understand about the culture of the others. Peace education is about understanding the others. So it would be contrary to the sharing of peace concepts and the like if our concentration is just on the understanding of peace based on, say, the book of a certain person. But what's the religious context? That's the word. So what's the religious context of peace as a Christian, non-Christian, Islamized, in other religious traditions? So that helps, because remember that Mindanao is a diverse people and culture and the like. So the more you discuss about the religious traditions of others and ethnicities of the others, the more you understand them. I think that's one of the missing parts in our conversation, because it seems like some people would shy away from discussing religion because it seems like, oh, it's a big no-no. But in the context of education, the sharing of ideas is practically encouraged, because that helps us to understand how limited we are in our understanding of the others. Because the moment we set a wall that says us and the others, the game is over. There has to be that breaking of the wall to make us understand that religion or peace is not just about highly academic discussion, but what's our. You go back to John's reference also before, that conflict transformation is personalized. It's a personal interaction. That means you go down deeper into what's your culture? Help me understand it. That kind of thing. In the same way that you also allow other students from other religious tradition to say something about their own holy books interpretation and idea about peace, or their own, supreme beings idea about peace. So for as long as you're inclusive, you do not exclude any specific religion, that is very fine, actually. Thank you.
Yes. Very well said, Attorney Neil. So religion should not divide us. It should unite us all. Okay, so we have one question here, John. So based on your personal experiences, how do you address biases of your teachers to ensure a more peaceful learning or classroom environment? Halakha.
Right. Siguro, because, siguro the premise always is that when we are growing up, maraming mga factors, mga influences that shapes our worldview, that shapes who we are, and that shapes how we look at other people. So I think it's very, we have to be aware first kung ano yung mga influences na yon and paano tayo na-influensyahan ng mga nun. Like for me, for example, just recent, hindi naman sa recent, pero I think it's an awakening for me when I realized na parang, may upbringing pala, may parents subtly parang embedded that parang image of a Christian person ba or kuan or a lumad person ba na for example ang na-embed sa amin although subtly na parang pagkaan ganyan Christian hindi mo maasa no may mga ganyan nga na tipo ng mga stereotypes. So I think when I was growing up dala-dala ko yung mga stereotypes na yun, nadadala ko sa classroom, nadadala ko sa mga pinupuntahan ko, di ba? But I think ayun, naging helpful, naging aware ako sa mga ganong mga pangyayari sa buhay ko. And then also I mentioned earlier na parang ayun nga, it's a reflective and a transformative na mga process din in terms of like kapag may mga nangyari sa'yo in the classroom na pwede maka-trigger nun, wag maging defensive na parang okay I will kumbaga take that as a learning opportunity for you to move forward and to reflect on that process. Parang parang ano yan na parang nasasawa na din ako sa word na reflective and self-awareness. Pero I think yun yung mga keywords eh. It's again it's personal and then it's reflective. Yun. So yun, actually, meron ba questions?
Okay, thank you for that, Sean. So I hope na satisfy po ka. From MSU Maguindanao pala yon. From your place, John.
Yeah.
Sariling atin. So sana din yung question kanina na from Sir Malano. So I
I'm
hope
sorry. Okay.
we cover your question.
Yeah.
So meron pa ba? So many are asking for a copy of your presentation. So I think nasa ano na yan. Care of the team.
Yeah.
From Sir Ado, we learned lessons from Sir John's presentation, though not so related with the topic, if we can use music related to the topics in our classroom discussions.
Did you say music? Sorry. Sabi niya music, kinanap ko, hindi ko makita. Yeah, I meant, sorry, saan dito, ma'am?
Ayan, from Sir Ado.
Baka na-direct sa'yo, hindi ko makita. But anyways, yeah, I mean,
if we can use music.
Yeah, I mean, because I think minsan may parang sometimes hindi naman obsession, pero parang sometimes feeling ko na parang inisip minsan ng mga tao na dialogue is just, for example, talking, and it's part of it. But I think that dialogue is creative and innovative. So you can use music as a way to actually dialogue, di ba? And I think Sir Mayong presented last week yung mga ginagawa nila, Sir Jovar, yung mga friends natin from MSU Jensen, they do a lot of creative and innovative na mga approaches as you know, as dialogue. So whether, di ba, may mga pinresent sila last week. So definitely, to answer the question, yeah, you can use music. You can even leverage on local symbols or local music in your place para mas, I guess, mas relatable and mas connected, if that would help. So, ayun.
All right. So do we have more? Okay, so I'd like to remind our attendees that your certificates will be sent to you through email. Please fill out the attendance form and then the link is in our chat box. So again, please fill out the attendance form. So again, you're encouraged to share your takeaways of the two topics this morning. Please do, we'll appreciate that. Or okay na? Very good. Okay na tayo, Weng. Ayon, okay na tayo, Weng. All right, so before we'll end today's session, we're going to, award, of course, our certificate. Wala na bang open forum? We can have open forum naman, Ben. Okay na, go na. Parang open forum na rin yan, ano? Alright, so we'll present our certificate of appreciation to Attorney Neil Pacamalan for sharing his valuable time and expertise as a guest speaker on topic Dissecting the Mindanao Conflict in the webinar 2 of Peace Education 2.0, Reimagining FPE 101 in the MSU system on June 18, 2021. This three-part webinar series provides continuing peace education for curriculum experts from the 11 Mindanao State University campuses. Okay, signed, Edrelyn C. Manla, PhD, Project Manager, Peace Education and Project. Nina Lewis, Cultural Affairs Officer, U.S. Embassy in the Philippines. Sir Neil, Attorney Neil, accept your certificate of appreciation. Yay! Then to John. Certificate of appreciation is given to Mr. John Badawi for sharing his valuable time and expertise as guest speaker on the topic conflict transformation moving beyond resolution in the webinar 2 of Peace Education 2.0 Reimagining FPE101 in the MSU system on June 18, 2021. So signed, Edrelyn C. Manla, PhD, Project Manager, Peace Education Project, and Ms. Nina Lewis, of Cultural Affairs Office, U.S. Embassy in the Philippines. So John, please accept your certificate. So thank you so much. Okay, before we'll end today, please open your camera for the photo. Photo op ba yan? Ayan po. Sige. Who's in charge of this? Come on, everyone. You're all encouraged to open your camera for the photo doc. Okay, ha?
Take care of it.
Okay, yes, Ma'am Ben.
Sige, smile lang kayo for 5 seconds.